is it?
Welcome back to the channel, guys. Hope you've been keeping well. So first up, apologies. This video took way longer than I wanted it to, and that's because I've been working on a lot of cool content that will be released on the channel in the weeks and the months to come. So do stay tuned and subscribed for that. But today, I'm really proud to say that Gigabyte have sent me my first notebook to review, and it is the X1 A7. Now, this laptop took me through a little bit of an emotional roller coaster. It was very difficult to review, and you'll understand why as we go through the review. Now, what I did was I found a video that kind of encompasses this journey that I went through, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the snippets of this, and you'll be able to kind of piece that together as we go through the review, and you'll understand why in the end. So I'm going to show you the first part now. Now we'll be looking through the design, the specifications, the performance, the cooling, and then we'll draw an overall conclusion so that you're able to understand this laptop holistically, the price and everything that you'd want to know. But let's look at this unit a little bit closer. So before we jump into design, I would ask that you please watch this review to the end. I've never said that before, and you can fact check me on it, even though you should be watching all reviews to the end. This one's got a moral at the end of the story. Now, the moral goes like this. As soon as you take this laptop out of the box, your eyes don't widen, your jaw doesn't drop. It's not a wowing laptop. It's fully made of plastic. Its weight is okay for a gaming laptop at 2.48 kilograms. The thickness is really thick at 3.55 centimeters, which is also kind of in line with gaming, but definitely not a key selling feature. There are redeeming factors to it where the keyboard is nice and punchy, great typing experience, great gaming experience. The hinge is nice and sturdy, and the bezels are thin. If we look underneath, it does have aggressive-ish type profiles that you'd expect of a gaming laptop. But overall on design, it's not a wow. You won't look at it and say that's a gaming laptop, because it just doesn't look like one. Moving on to cooling, and before we move on to cooling, mentioned a little bit earlier, laptop manufacturers try to make laptops as thin and as light as possible, and this is true even in gaming, not to the same extent, but still true. Now, what happens when you make a laptop thinner is you push the components closer towards each other, and just like if someone is standing on your left and someone is standing on your right and they start moving closer, you start to share heat and become hotter, and the same is true in components. Laptop manufacturers do combat this through certain means, but when looking at this laptop, it is 3.55 centimeters thick, which is really thick. It's not overly thick, but it's pretty thick. But Gigabyte allowed me to, and I don't get many opportunities to do this, so thank you very much, allowed me to open this to actually look at the thermal solution. Now, we can see that there are big open pockets of air, almost like vapor chambers in this laptop, and I was really interested to know how this would impact the performance or the CPU and the GPU, how well it would actually ventilate and what impact it would have on the thermals. So we can even see one of these heat pipes is pretty much standing in mid-air, where I was worried, okay, is this going to be flimsy? And it's really not. So if that is a worry for you, you can take that out of your mind completely, because it is well put together and sturdy. But the real proof of the pudding is in the eating when it comes to thermal. So we are going to check that out when we get to performance. Okay, so specs time, and the first spec that we'll look at is the CPU, which is an impressive Ryzen 9 5900HX. So it does have onboard graphics in AMD Radeon graphics. So this is an 8-core 16-thread processor, so nice high core count. It can go up to 105 degrees on Tmax, but more importantly, it is 3.3 up to 4.6 gigahertz. It's based off of the Zen 3 architecture, 7mm, and its TDP is 45 watts. For extra information, if you wanted to know, it does have a 4 meg L2 cache and a 16 meg L3 cache. So all around a good processor. So moving on to the graphics, besides the Radeon graphics Vega 7, if you wanted to know, it does have a dedicated graphics card in the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3070, which packs 8 gigs of GDDR6. So a very nice and beefy graphics card to complement the CPU. Moving on to RAM, and what I'm seeing generally pretty much all the time now is 3222, and it's no different here. The RAM is 3200 megahertz, CAS latency of 22, and I would have liked to have seen 3400 or 3600 or 3400 or 3600 megahertz, because AMD does tend to operate better under higher frequency RAM. However, the impact was negligible because it is dual channel of 8.8, so totaling 16 megabytes of DDR4 in dual channel. Talking about storage, it has got one storage in an SSD, NVMe SSD M.2 interface, which is a 512. It's pretty fast, but I'll speak about that in performance. The monitor or display is pretty standard what we see in gaming, really good, 72% NTSC, which is 99% sRGB. It is an IPS level display, and it is 120 by 1080, so full HD, but it does have a refresh rate of 144 Hertz, so really good for those FPS games. Moving over to the IOs or input outputs, I've put this on specs rather than the design, but it's got one USB 2.0 Type A, it's got one USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A, it's got one HDMI 2.0, one mini DisplayPort 1.4, it does have a USB Type C at the back, that is USB 3.2 Gen 2, which acts as DisplayPort 1.4 should you so wish. It does have one audio combo jack, it has one microphone jack, it's obviously got its DC power in, and also located at the back we have got a RJ45 or Ethernet port. So moving on to the camera and the audio or the speakers, it is a 720p 0.9 megapixels, so not that impressive again on the camera, but this is what I've been seeing in pretty much all laptops that I have reviewed. The speakers are 2x2 watt tweeters, and it is Nahimic V3 tuned, which is going to be more for your headsets, but the audio for me sounded very dull and underwater. But it's weird because the speakers are located underneath the laptop at an angle, so it's almost like it's bouncing, because when you lift the laptop up, the audio does get better. Not great, but it gets better. So there's this weird reverberation where the sound is actually echoing underneath, which makes it again sound like it's underwater. But not too concerned about that, because if you're going to be watching a movie, you will be fine, and if you're gaming, you should be gaming with a headset anyway. Moving over to the communications or how the device connects, the Ethernet is a 2.5G, the wireless is 802.11ax, which is Wi-Fi 6 and then backwards compatible, and the Bluetooth is version 5.2. So besides the camera and the speakers, everything with regards to specs on paper looks great, but paper doesn't tell the story, performance tells the story. So for the next section, we are going to dive into the digital world, and we're going to see how this laptop performed, what did the temperatures look like, how did the individual components perform, and lastly, how did they perform in games overall working together. So on Cinebench R23 multi-core, we hit a score of 12,408, which is a good score, but relative to CPU Monkey's result of 13,875, it did underperform a bit, which I found strange, because if you look at the temperatures, the Tmax on this is 105 degrees, and the highest temperature on any one of the cores was 86.4 degrees. So Cinebench R23 single core, really happy here, 1478 compared to CPU Monkey's 1478, so hitting that on the money. The temperatures of little consequence in a single core test, but it was 79.2 on core 4 and 77 on core 6. Starting with the performance of the SSD, in peak performance it did 3456 in read, and then in write it did 2509. In real world performance, on read it did 2233 and on write it did 2513. On the memory benchmark, the actual RAM, we can see the memory, the L1, the L2, and the L3 caches. On read doing 43,383, write doing 33,688, and on copy doing 38,196 with a latency of 76 nanoseconds. And then for all the extra information, you'd need to pause to be able to see what the L1, L2, and L3 cache did. Just some extra information for those who are interested. I did the 8064 GPU benchmark. As you can see, GPU 1 being the RTX 3070 and GPU 2 being the Radeon, and you will be able to see the memory, read, write, and copy, as well as some of the other benchmarks like Julia and Mendel. So before we run into CPU marks, benchmarks, the system information, something that you can pause on here to be able to see the processor, graphics, storage, and all the other general information of this system or laptop. Looking at PC Mark is something that tests the overall capabilities of a unit, desktop or laptop, and it checks things like how it browses the web, how does it do on spreadsheets, productivity, and so on. It hit a really good score of 6770, and you can see comparatively against a gaming PC of 2020, it beat a gaming PC that has a Ryzen 7 3700X as well as a AMD Radeon RX 5700 XT. We can see the temperatures here, and I'll bring up all the graphs. The CPU got a little bit high on 95.13 and the GPU 82.99. However, as mentioned, this tests every single component in the laptop to be able to give an overall score on performance. Moving on to TimeSpy, it did phenomenally with a score of 10,388. As you can see, it put a further gap than it did in PC Mark between it and a gaming PC of 2020 with the same specs. The temperatures during TimeSpy were relative to PC Mark, with the CPU there hitting over 90, round about 93 on the top, and the GPU hitting a max of just under 90, 89.5 or so, again pushing this laptop to the max. So again, relatively good scores. Starting off with our benchmarks in gaming, Formula 1 2021 was an Ultra and it was raced on Emola at 1080p. Average of 90.2, minimum 7.8, that was just coming out of the loading screen. The maximum was 108.5, 1% low 39, and 0.1% low 8.6. Moving on to Rome Total War 2, this was also at Ultra in 1080p with an average of 85.7, this is in the map section. Minimum of 64.7 with a maximum of 108. Then in an actual battle, the average was 94.5, minimum 80.2, maximum 109.6. The 1% low 68.3 and the 0.1% low 48.8. Far Cry 6, a little bit more demanding on the graphics, average of 79.7. This is also an Ultra, by the way, at 1080p. Minimum of 58.8, maximum of 95.1. Please ignore the 1% and 0.1% lows, as the game wasn't played for too long, so these averages don't really count. The die getting to 94.4, which is 10 away from T-Max, but the hottest core was at 91.4 on Core 4, so totally normal temperatures coming out of the CPU there. According to AMD, the GPU hit a hotspot of 90.3, but the temperature 82.7. So overall good thermals considering Far Cry 6 was played at Ultra. Rome Total War 2 on Ultra, same thing as Far Cry 6, where it's 94.5 on the die, but the hottest core, Core 0, getting to 91.6. So same conclusion there. However, the GPU really cool on a 71.5 on hotspot, 65.6 on the temperature. However, Rome Total War is more of a CPU bound game, so again, good temperatures coming out of that, considering that T-Max is 105 and normal to AMD. Formula 1 2021, again at Ultra, T-Die hitting 93.5, again, same conclusion as Rome as well as a Far Cry 6, hottest core getting to 92.2, GPU temperatures hotspot of 90.9, and the GPU temperature 83.1. So altogether, again, good temps considering T-Max of 105 as well as the AMD norms.
$1 million, you could probably buy that Lambo, and if anybody's got $28, you can buy that phone truck.
Okay guys, it's time to conclude, and I'll conclude with this. Now, embarrassingly, I judged the book by its cover. I judged this laptop before I'd even turned it on. And as a gamer, you should know that thermals are everything. You could have the highest specs, but if you don't have the cooling to manage it, you're not going to get the best performance because you are going to be throttling. This laptop pushed so hard. I even had Formula 1 2021 open at the same time as Rome 2, and I was wondering why am I only getting 60, 65 frames, but it's because I had 2 games open at the same time. It literally beat every expectation. Now, let's talk about price. I looked far and wide. I couldn't find a dollar price. I do apologize, but at the moment, I saw Woodware selling it for 33,499 Rand, which is an absolute steal. I did see other prices ranging 36, 37,000, and I do believe that Kloppers will be stocking this soon. So that is it from me, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this review, and I hope we all learned a valuable lesson in not judging a laptop by its cover. Cheers for now. Goodbye.